if there is a harm being caused, we all owe a moral responsibility to society to make sure that there is a chain of causation that ensures that somebody can be accountable. And right now, that's the missing bit. That's where we
Yeah.
haven't quite got it right. We know what the technology is mostly able to do, but not entirely. We know a lot of the harms that might be caused as a result of it. What we don't have yet is the accountability structures that say when it goes wrong, who is the person within that chain that's responsible.
Louise, OpenAI, Anthropic, and Microsoft signed a joint letter to US Congress, and most people have called it progress. You've called it strategic positioning. Can you explain why?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's wrong, I think is probably the first point to say. I think that there is a really good set of synergies coming through between the way that these big tech companies are now talking to each other in a way that they haven't in the past. So, there's a recognition that they need to start working together a bit more collaboratively on some of these bigger issues. So I welcome that very much. I do think it's strategic positioning in a number of different ways. Interestingly, I was at a roundtable at the British Institute for Comparative Law last night, and we were talking exactly about these causal chains of connection that lead from a harm to a party that might be responsible. So when we're talking about if this technology could be used by a bad actor in a completely different industry and it causes harm, where does the accountability line lie? And, as we start becoming more sophisticated with the legal frameworks that we construct and the regulatory frameworks that we construct, there is an argument for saying that potentially there could end up being some liability that sits at the door of big tech for having facilitated the technology, which is then used by a bad actor to cause harm. So it is in their interest to be part of this conversation to begin with. It is in their interest to recognize where their technology might be used in a nefarious way and to be part of the governance and the guardrails that sit around it. So I think that's all really positive. But I also think that it's not just being nice for its own sake. It is strategic positioning insofar as recognizing, because they will know better than we do, how far this impact could reach. And also the extent to which it might be used. We've got new updates coming through all the time. We were just talking about this new kind of powerful system coming forward. We don't know how that could be used and when that might be used in a way which is really kind of problematic. So I think there's a bit of strategic positioning there, but I also think there's a bit of strategic positioning as to, we've seen very, very strong AI resistance coming through from kind of groundswell level up. And I think there's a lot of discontent, a lot of concern about it, the technology, how fast it's moving, the lack of guardrails and governance that sits around it at the moment. And so obviously it's in their interest to start addressing some of these concerns, which are legitimate and valid. And so being able to position themselves as saying, yes, we are listening, yes, we are taking this seriously, is as much a part of the marketing as it is actually being part of the conversation that puts the guardrails in place.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. As you know, as you said, there needs to be some accountability from the companies, given what their products are able to do and accelerate, around these kind of what's going on. So, Louise, just to go back a little bit and talk about yourself and your background. So, you've been a litigator. You've worked in Papua New Guinea. You ran a zero waste retail store, and now you're doing AI governance consultancy. That's quite a diverse kind of career path. Can you kind of talk us through that?
Sure. And so it goes back further than that. I started off with philosophy as my academic degree. So I was a philosopher to begin with. So the idea of sort of systems and ethics and logic and structures and how we apply cognitive thinking to real world applications, both theoretically and in practice, has always been the kind of foundational part of my kind of academic thinking, if you like. And actually, that's a lot of what law does as well, particularly within regulatory services. So I was a financial services litigator. So for me, it was looking at what is the harm that gets caused? What's the bottom line liability and impact when a system goes wrong and causes harm to an end consumer? bottom line. Um,
Mm.
but I was also doing a lot of corporate social responsibility work with my firm, Evershed Sutherland, and community investment engagement work with local groups and community interest groups and things like that. I just loved it, and I thought, you know what, I'm coming up for 30. I really love being able to work within communities and see what those systems actually achieve in practice. So I moved out of law into the third sector, and specifically in international development, because it was really that kind of human rights system change objective that I was really interested in. How do we improve systems with an economic mindset to better enhance the opportunities for everybody? How can we use systems? How can we use laws? How can we use policy? How can we use business in order to enhance opportunity for everybody? Because I genuinely believe that if we enhance those opportunities across the board for everybody, it improves the systems up, down, left, right, and everywhere else. If you have pockets of deprivation, pockets of poverty, and these are not really pockets anymore, let's be fair, it is worse off for everyone. And what we have seen happening is this massive gap becoming more and more apparent between those who have and those who have not. And I think that, you know, the equitization of those systems and processes was really important to me. So bringing all of that to the ethics of AI is actually, for me, a completely logical step, because what we're talking about is massive systemic problems that are being exacerbated and harms which are being amplified by this technology, or have the potential to at least. And we don't have the laws and the regulations and the guidelines and the guardrails to actually adopt this technology in a way that's massively opportunistic and recognizes the fantastic, brilliant things it could do, but in a way that doesn't cause those harms for the most disproportionately affected people within the planet. So that's where I'm kind of coming from. So there is a logical chain that runs through it. It's just not necessarily obvious from the outside.
Yeah. So obviously, from a regulatory perspective, we now have the EU AI Act, and I know there's a UK AI Act coming soon as well. So I think we are starting to see some regulation around this. You know, there's been enough alarm bells going off that we do need regulation around these things. So I think we, but I get what you're saying about this whole kind of like, you know, making a level playing field. It seems like that's really important.
I mean, I think we have to be pragmatic about this as well. I don't think it's ever going to be a level playing field, but what it can be
Yeah,
is
no, that's probably that's probably the wrong term, to be honest, because that would be naive, and and that's just not how things work, unfortunately. So yeah.
So level playing
Yeah.
field is probably not the kind of the target I would be looking at. What I would
No.
be saying is, you know, how can we make sure that this technology is not designed and deployed in a manner which causes active harm and trauma to individuals who have the right not to be treated that way, and not to be impacted by this technology in a way which is regressive and in breach of the rights that they are entitled to.
And not having anyone be accountable for what it's doing.
Absolutely. Exactly
Yeah.
right.
Exactly.
Absolutely. You know, if there is a harm being caused, we all owe a moral responsibility to society to make sure that there is a chain of causation that ensures that somebody can be accountable. And right now, that's the missing bit. That's where we haven't quite got it right. We know what the technology is mostly able to do, but not entirely. We know a lot of the harms that might be caused as a result of it. What we don't have yet is the accountability structures that say when it goes wrong, who is the person within that chain that's responsible. And that's a really, really difficult thing, because, you know, in ESG terms, in legal terms, in regulatory terms, we talk about governance structures for the most part as being pretty linear, pretty kind of causal. So one step leads to another. Where is the chain of accountability that leads from harm to accountability? And that's just, I don't think, actually possible with AI, because it is multi-layered, it is multi-nodal, and it's constantly evolving. So a law or a regulation or a framework or a policy that you put in place one day, by the time that the next week comes, it might not be fit for purpose. So we've got to radically think about how this multinodal pervasive system, or set of systems, we should say, actually operates, and maybe start looking at architecturally creating governance systems that mirror the way that it works, so that we're not relying on these sort of, traditional causal chains, which perhaps aren't fit for purpose as far as, the thing you're trying to govern is concerned. And that's a massive piece. It's a huge conversation.
Yeah, and the problem is, of course, that also if you build legislation or whatever, it takes a long time to get approved through all the tick all the correct boxes. So you're always 3/4 to maybe a year behind on what's happening in the market.
Yeah.
So you have to rethink from
and
the
so
start.
whatever you design has to recognize that that's always going to be the case, and it has to be agile enough and flexible enough in order to say, okay, well, if that particular piece of legislation on its own isn't enough, what else do we need around it in order to provide sufficient guardrails collectively? So I think rather than it being a piece of law or a piece of legislation or a piece of regulation or a framework, we need to be looking at a collective, almost like a toolbox, if you like, lots of different things which collectively actually ensure that those harms don't get caused in the first place, preferably, or if they do, that there's a chain of connection back to an accountability structure, individual, organization, or otherwise that can be held responsible for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I'm just thinking about how everything evolves so quickly. Are we talking about potentially an AI agent to look at AI in some cases?
I mean,
which
at least
I think has to be part of it because of how these things evolve so quickly.
The speed.
Yeah. So you have to have some sort of like sentinel type thing looking at it. So and because of how quickly it changes, we need to utilize the technology to govern itself.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And actually, there's some interesting things that come out about that. I mean, we've had all these talks and examples in the media recently about agents going rogue, and it's all very funny. And entire databases being deleted and so on and so forth. And some of that comes down to poor data governance at the end of the day. Like you don't put your foundational data and your database in the same cloud as the backup. Like so there are lessons to be learned about things like that.
We've talked about this whole kind of thing before about just because the term AI is now mentioned, we've had 30 to 40 years of IT practices that standards that we all use when it comes to backup, when it comes to data classification, access controls. So just because the term AI comes along, we don't go, oh no, we just dump all of that. And that's what our Rob, who was a previous guest, said. We don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to AI governance. We already have a lot of the mechanisms and tools and in place. So exactly about that. It's not, because someone argued with me about this, and they were kind of right, that it wasn't the AI agents, it was the governance and the guardrails were not correct. So, because generally, well, no, I'm not going to say AI agents don't have malicious intent, because it depends on
it depends on who builds them. Yeah.
It depends on who builds them. Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing. Yeah, but I definitely think AI has to be part of any kind of governance mechanism we put in because of how quickly things change and evolve.
And that is why I talk about the Mycelium network of governance, that governance for AI cannot sit with a governance expert any longer. It needs to sit with the people that understand the technology, the people that built the regulatory frameworks that you guys sit under, that I used to sit under as a lawyer, that my financial services client sat under. It needs to be the human rights practitioners who are saying, well, we understand what it looks like when external systems are imposed on communities or people and harm is caused. We need to be in that conversation. It needs to be the end users who are part of that conversation. Nothing about us without us is a common principle in international development. It needs that entire network of people all saying, right, what does it look like from my lens? What does it look like from my point of view? And then how can we work together to build that suite of tools that actually not only identifies what the risks are within those individual departments and silos, but also what are the risks that flag up between them if nobody else is watching. And this is potentially where your sort of agentic solution comes in. You know, you've got these not rogue agents roaming around these different silos and sections going, well, hold on a second, this team doesn't usually talk to this team, but did you realize that that's going to impact on that? Here's a red flag, you need to do something about this. But then you've got that whole layer of, well, once the red flag has popped up, whose responsibility then is it? Is it that team or someone that sits in the middle? So that's what I mean by we might have to totally rethink what governance looks like and whose responsibility these things are, because they don't sit neatly into little camps anymore in the way that they have previously.
Yeah, no. I think it's very much like the whole siloed approach we've had in HR doesn't talk to IT and all that, and that goes out the window with this because everyone has to talk to everyone. And I think on a previous episode we were talking, and someone was saying you need to have it can't just be C-level people in there; it has to be across an organization. And one of the people our guest mentioned was like, you should have one of the IT support people on there. And I was like, oh wow, yeah, that's a really good idea, because they deal with this stuff firsthand.
Yeah.
So they have so again, that's what you're saying. You have to have the lens of everyone across an organization to kind of have the right kind of level of governance.
But I think there's another point to that, which is really, really important, because it's something that organizations do very badly. Now, as a lawyer, I have a particular language. My banking clients had a particular language. UIT people have a particular language. Comms, HR, whomever has a particular language. And what we need is more legibility. I don't think that a lot of the time there is what is active miscommunication. I think what there is a kind of a missing of how that information gets passed from one sector to another, or from one department to another, because we don't talk the same languages. So it's almost like you need someone that can sort of sit across and bridge. Well, actually what this person's saying is this, and actually what this person's saying is that. But that means you need people who have cross-sector knowledge and experience to do that bridging. And that's what the Mycelium network really does. It is it's the knowledge sharing, the communication layer that sits under the forest floor that allows one species to talk to another species and to, share knowledge and communication despite the fact that they are completely different things. And that's exactly what we're talking about. It's not just about having those people in the room. It's also having someone to decipher what it is that they mean for another audience. And that, again, is a completely radical way. Maybe I should call myself the AI decipherer or something instead. Because I've got this background in lots of different areas. I can say, well, actually, I think you're saying the same thing, but maybe just coming at it from different points of view, or with a different language. So it's also then about, how do we create a shared language that we all understand together? And because none of us know the answers to any of these things at the moment, this is a great opportunity for us to create, through this governance mechanism, that shared language that then allows people to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses when it comes to the workflows that they operate in and the way that they communicate with their teams. The communication and that human element is a really, really important part, as well as potentially that agent that flags up the risks and does all the kind of scooting around in the background. But how much we allow that to act autonomously is also a massive question, of course.
Yeah, what I was thinking about, what you say about getting all these teams together in a room and being the translator between them, that's a radical new approach, because I work at a lot of companies where there has been silos for years. You have the legal silo, the IT silo, the HR silo, the governance silo. It means kicking all these silos out and getting everybody on the same page. And that's going to be on the human side of things, something, because there's a lot of things that happen in the past, because that's why teams don't like each other or don't play nice.
Yeah.
It's going to be an awesome journey to get everybody back on track of saying, okay, guys, we now have a big problem that if we don't play nice together, we're not going to solve this. inside companies and also in a governmental environment. So that's going to be a fun thing to watch.
Yeah. Actually, we've got some really good research around sort of team enhancement and performance and really good leadership and a bit like what your other speaker was talking about. A lot of this isn't new. It's just that we haven't been applying it very well. So,
Yeah.
in executive coaching, for example, which I do a lot of, we talk about the golden thread, which aligns the organizational objectives through the departments, through the teams, and into the individual person's workflows and tasks. And if you have something that's out of line, which frankly most companies are, if you don't have psychological safety in the T where someone can go, actually, do you know what? I feel really uncomfortable about this, or I don't think this is going to work, or there's a problem here that needs, and they don't have the confidence because of the team culture to actually upline that or flag it as a risk. That's when crises develop. But actually, what we're talking about here is bringing everything back to that golden thread. How do we make sure? And none of that's new, actually. It's just a different application of coaching principles, of leadership management principles that have been talked about but not really applied fully. And I think, we need to start saying, well, where are the industries that have done this really well? So, if we're talking about a team feeling really comfortable making mistakes and getting it wrong and grazing their knees, the aviation industry is a brilliant industry to look at, because when somebody makes a mistake, when a near fatal accident takes place, there is a no blame culture, an active no blame culture that says we don't point fingers, we don't judge and stigmatize. What we do is we work out why it went wrong, and then we do something about making sure. So if you look mile for mile, actually aviation is the safest industry to travel in because it has this active approach to mistake making and risk management around that. So I don't think a lot of this needs to be new necessarily. It just needs some coordination about where these really good use cases sit, where these really good practice industries lie. What are the industries where you do have those really good alignments? What have they done? And maybe it does need some mediators and some dispute managers to go, okay, we understand your legacy issues with this department, but actually, what can we do to resolve that to make you feel comfortable and then to move on cooperatively and collaboratively going forward? So it's going to take lots of different skills. And I think a lot of those skills, ironically, are the human ones. It's the ones that say, I recognize harm's been caused. I recognize you've got a right to feel upset. But actually, this is a bigger thing now. So let's work out what we need to heal you from your concern, complaint, trauma, whatever it is, and then start moving collaboratively forward. So that's going to take much better, psychological safety, much better leadership and management, not just promoting people up because they're good at the job, actually training them how to be managers, training them how to be leaders, ensuring that we've got diversity within the design teams who are creating these products that are reflective of the end users that are going to be having the AI deployed to them. So all of those things need to kind of come together. And that's where there's a lot of genuinely human work that needs to take place in order to start building those suites of governance guardrails.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just to pick up on one point you made there, Louise, about you were talking about diversity, and women are 20% less likely to use AI, and you've argued this is not a hesitancy; it's a considered position. So, how do you make the case to someone whose job is to drive adoption?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's the right one to be asking because, at the moment, the narrative seems to be women are behind, then they're adopting more slowly. The girls have got to catch up with the boys, and this is a problem. And I'd like to sort of flip the narrative on that and say, well, actually, caution and concern are valid. Caution and concern are rational. When you are talking about a group who is most overrepresented and the people that have experienced the harms of these AIs, whether it is, I don't know, bias in facial recognition software, 35%, Black women are more likely to be picked up incorrectly by facial recognition software than white men. That is not an irrational thing to be mistrustful of.
No.
When you're talking about algorithmic bias in hiring tools, when you're talking about credit scoring, when you're talking about inaccurate healthcare diagnostics, and these are disproportionately affecting women or underrepresented communities, those are not irrational things to be worried about or concerned about. And what it does is then creates mistrust. So actually, there's a commercial opportunity for the right companies to get it.
It's going to take some editing.
For companies to get it right by
You're
saying,
getting good at
instead
it.
of seeing adoption as being
I
a
suck less at
problem,
it every
what
day.
do we do to address the concerns, the legitimate concerns that these people have? You know, why is it that they're mistrustful,
Maybe
and what can we do about that?
Because I think she's on her phone.
I think so.
Yeah, you're back.
I'm back. Sorry about that. Where did you get to? Or do you want me to just start that commercial bit again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will I ask the question again, or?
Yeah, that would for the podcast, that would be the best.
Okay.
And the easiest.
Okay, Louise, speaking about diversity, women are 20% less likely to use AI. You've argued that this is not a hesitancy, it's a considered position. How do you make the case to someone whose job it is to drive adoption?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think, you know, currently the narrative is women are adopting more slowly, and that's a problem. The girls need to catch up with the boys. And it's like, well, hold on a second there. If you're talking about a group which is overrepresented in the people that have experienced the harms that come from some of these AI tools, whether we are talking about experience of algorithmic bias in hiring, whether we are talking about credit scoring, whether we're talking about inaccurate healthcare diagnostics, whether we're talking about 35% sort of failure rates on facial recognition software when it comes to Black women rather than white men, you know, these are not irrational concerns. We are the active people who are disproportionately bearing the brunt of the harms that might be caused by this technology. So actually, I would say to anyone who is pushing adoption, listen to those concerns and then address them. Because the only way you're going to build trust and confidence in your product from a consumer is by addressing the concerns that they have. And what we find all the way across the board is that we've got these very, very opaque terms and conditions and opaque kind of, you know, very lengthy missives about privacy and data security and what's happening with my information. Make it simple. Talk to people in plain language. You know, we've got a principle in international development called free, prior, informed consent, and this is a requirement of the extractive industries when they're working with Indigenous communities. And I feel like there's a really good analogy that can be drawn from that actually makes a positive commercial case for encouraging people into the use of these tools. Because if they feel fearful of it, if they feel afraid for it, even if they do adopt, they're also going to be the first people to opt back out again. So actually, there's a commercial value in saying, yes, we hear what you're saying. Yes, those concerns are legitimate. Let's work with you. Let's create some use groups where we're listening to the people who are most concerned in order to address those issues or provide the information that you might already have. So, you know, I did a conversation with Zoom about sort of, you know, trust and safety in their responsible team and about the way that they were using AI within their platform. And what it boiled down to was I hadn't understood a lot of, and I come from a legal background, so not daft. You know, I hadn't understood a lot of the safety parameters that they'd already put in place. Once I had that one-on-one conversation and I understood, I felt a lot more comfortable and confident using that tool and that platform as a result. And it's exactly the same thing with the technology. It's not about saying, we've just got to get them to adopt notwithstanding. It's about saying, right, what are the legitimate concerns? And the companies that do that best will bring the biggest number of customers back to their tool. Because, you know, if you look at the Edelman's trust barometer, you know, trust and safety and those kind of things are one of the biggest drivers of consumer adoption of any product across the board, whether that's B2B or whether that's consumers to individual products. You build trust and confidence. You build really straightforward privacy understanding policies, and you are transparent about the things that you can be transparent about. You are more likely to get people to adopt than otherwise. So that's the approach I would be looking at. And that doesn't mean you're just forcing people, you're being quiet about the things that they might be concerned about. Talk about it. And there's really good examples of that. Patagonia did really, really well as a clothing brand that has an environmental sustainability kind of agenda. It's very transparent about what the environmental concerns about clothing manufacturer were. It was really, really transparent about saying, okay, yeah, we understand that you are, as the public, concerned about these things. Here's where our supply chains do have problems. And they almost owned those issues, but saw themselves as being part of the solution as well. Now they've flipped their sort of socks, and they've gone the other way, and then they're having a real problem. And again, this is where that trust can also get broken back down again, because they're currently suing a drag artist called Patagonia, who is an environmental activist. I mean, if that's not a missed opportunity, I don't know it is. They've built up this amazing reputation for really being forward-looking about how they address the concerns that their consumers have, and then they go I find it a little bit rich when they're a company that has appropriated a global south region in order to name themselves. And yes, they've got the legal right to do so under trademark legislation, but they're now kind of suing someone who's actually got the same mission as them. So I think that's a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
A collab. Yeah, a collab might be better.
Yeah, exactly. So we've talked about how women are, less likely to use AI, but it also seems to be the same with Gen Z, and their distrust can be read as ideological, but you've kind of said it's more rational than that.
Yeah, and I think you've got to look at what that generation has been through, what has been done to them. They are the generation that's generally between about 14 and 27 now. And you think about, statistically, research-wise, we know that they have experienced more helicopter parenting, for example, than any other generation. We know that they have been exposed to social media, and we know that they are the first generation in the last 100 years since these matrices were tracked, that is now cognitively performing worse than their parents were, because of the education system, that we were teaching them to pass exams instead of asking them to think for themselves, because of the impact of social media, because of the impact of AI, all of those things. They're also the generation which has been through a global financial crisis, a global pandemic, a cost of living crisis. I mean, why on earth should this generation trust our generation who have created these systems? Why should they? I don't think it's rational. When their lived experience has been crisis after crisis after crisis caused by people and systems that are not designed for them, I think their response is entirely rational. But it also means that you've got a commercial reality, which is the next generation coming through doesn't trust you as a company and doesn't trust your product. And you've got a very short window to turn that around before they become the people with the buying power, and the people who are in leadership positions, and the people who are going to be starting to make those choices. So, and again, it comes back to the conversation we had earlier about strategic positioning. These big AI companies, these big tech companies, they know that. They know that this whole generation of emergent leaders and the newer, who are going to be the biggest consumers going forward, don't like them and don't trust them.
Yeah, but I think there's levels to that. Obviously, there's been massive backlash against OpenAI, and Anthropic have kind of come up above, but now that kind of seems to be turning a bit as well. So it's interesting, but yeah, OpenAI are definitely the villains of the piece at the moment. Well, we all obviously have Meta, who are the ultra villains.
Well, I'd go even further than that. I think it's probably Musk and Grok at the top of the chain right now.
Well, I'd probably go even further and say it's Palantir, and nobody talks half as much about them. And they
I
get
feel like I'm
raced.
constantly talking about Palantir.
Yeah, yeah.
But but this is the point, isn't it? Every single one of those is considered really, really problematic. And either an Anthropic, yes, it positions itself really nicely, and it's got the much more comfortable reasoned voice within that conversation, but it has still got the same issue around where it got its data in the first place. You know, every single one of these LLMs has been trained on extracted data, which has not been paid for from the entire of global history. Well, that's not a terribly moral position to be starting from, is it? So, I do think that their responses are much more considered. I do think that, there was a funny LinkedIn, and it said the philosophers are going to have the last laugh because Anthropic had hired 9 of them or something
Yeah,
to
yeah.
support Amanda Aspel. And I'm like, okay, when they get a philosopher, a human rights practitioner, someone that represents all the different communities that are going to be impacted by this harm, a social scientist and a data specialist into every design team, then you talk to me about what's an appropriate response. Until that point, if it's still the same homogenous group of individuals in those design teams, in those development teams, in those deployment teams, there is still going to be a problem at the other end. Because once it comes to audit, all the questions that might have been addressed right at the outset have not been addressed. And so this is where governance is looking very much like a remedial mop-up exercise and not anything that's preventative at this point in time. So, once those companies start putting that in as a kind of a core team to begin with, as well as the technologists and the architects and the builders and the engineers, they've got all that phenomenal tech experience and knowledge, then we can start talking about who's having the last laugh, because I don't think it's the philosophers yet.
No, but yeah, I think you're right in that, and I think because like not to be completely negative, there are so many benefits to the technology, and I think companies like Google DeepMind have done some really impressive stuff, and they are kind of the flag bearers when I come to thinking about what's the good. Because if you look at the CEO, Demetrius Hassabis, he has a very clear vision of what he wants AI to do, and that kind of more aligns with what I'm looking for when it comes to AI and the benefits we can see, whether it's like cancer treatments, all this kind of stuff, getting rid of all these diseases and stuff that we should be able to by utilizing AI. So yeah, I think there's a balance to these things. And but unfortunately, all of these companies are beholden to their shareholders, and that's the where things get skewed. And then obviously there's the geopolitical pressures as well that come into it that kind of influence what happens and how these technologies are deployed. So I think that has a huge bearing on them, but ultimately there is potential for them to do some real good in the world.
Amazing. Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think this is where I don't want anybody to be listening to this thinking that I'm anti-technology or that I'm anti-AI. I'm not at all. But I really think that there is a redressing of the balance that needs to be had across every sector. And that is one of the most important things, because, if, and it comes down to us as consumers as well. I mean, let's be frank about that. So when you're talking about one AI image being generated, taking the same amount of electricity as charging an entire mobile phone, and you think about the number of people using AI to do lip syncing pets and dancing fruit, and it's just like, oh, for God's sake, really? Like this incredible technology, which is going to drain our resources. We've all got a responsibility to use it responsibly as well. And so that means being a bit more cautious about what choices we make. And we have to be owning that part of the conversation also, and taking our own responsibility for what we use AI for. Was it really necessary for me to use AI to that? Or could I have just used my brain, which actually then helps you to develop your brain?
Yeah. We our previous episode talked about the whole thing about cognitive decline and the reverse Flynn effect, and how we've seen this massive change since the introduction of social media, and AI only exasperates that even more. And that you need to, as you said, think about a task and go, will I just take a pen and paper and write the outline first, and then maybe, engage with AI. And I've been trying to do that more and more myself as well when I'm doing things. Because it can become a crutch that you go, oh, just get the AI to do it.
Yeah.
But then there's things like, if I've got like a transcript or something and I want to extract data out of it, like, there are tasks which it's really good at, but that kind of really creative spark, I think it always has to come from ourselves.
Yeah. And actually, it's not, I think it's beyond just using it as a personal crutch as well. We're going to end up with industry. So, I'm someone that's got nearly 30 years experience in law, regulatory services, international development, all these different industries. I can look at something that comes out as an output from AI, and I've got a pretty good guess if it's within my sphere of expertise as to whether or not it's true or not. You're talking about an entry-level person who hasn't got 30 years of experience behind them, then they don't have the knowledge yet to actually pick up whether or not an AI has hallucinated or whether or not something is accurate. And yes, there is an extent to which, it wouldn't be difficult to cross-reference that response, but that means that their boss and the team has to factor enough time into their workday to be able to do that meter checking, to be able to make sure, because we put so much pressure, all these KPIs, or, I was a lawyer, we build in 6-minute units, for goodness sakes. Every 6 minutes of my day had to be tracked on a little timer. Like, sort of amount of pressure means that you can absolutely see how these junior lawyers or, entry level Deloitte analysts or whomever think, oh, I've got so much to do. I've got so much pressure. I've got so many things that I'm being required to achieve. I don't feel like I've got enough support around me to do that. I'm just going to take the easy route. You can absolutely 100% see how it happens. But if we recognize that there's a data, this chap's been created a database of legal citations that have ended up in court and have been wrong.
Or haven't existed.
Or haven't existed. Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, I think there was one in the US and it got it got as far as a judge, and the judge went, that doesn't actually exist. I don't know what you're talking about. And
so the US clients,
the reputation of that law firm was trashed in that one instance just because someone was lazy and didn't double check their homework, which,
And lazy is the usual framing, but I also think, look at who it is that's doing that thing. Yes, they should have checked, but look at the pressure they're under as well from industry. Look at the team that they're working in. I don't feel that I necessarily always had psychologically safe teams that I worked in as a junior lawyer necessarily from some of the managers that I worked under. So I do see it from both sides, and it means we need to better prepare and better support those young people so that when they become the leader that in theory has got 30 years experience behind them, they've actually got 30 years of experience instead of just being in the industry and having AI done to them. Because that's not the same thing.
Excellent. All right. So just to kind of start to wrap up, if obviously our audience is has a tech background, so what's the kind of one question they should be asking before they deploy AI systems that most of them are currently not?
This is a really great question. I'm going to be speaking to the Software Testers Conference next month on this a little bit more. But I think, in one question, it is, who is going to be your end user and what potential harms could be caused by this tool? Because as technologists, you're given a brief and you're saying, so you can achieve something which technologically is 100% sound, ticks all the parameters, applies exactly the right sort of, skills and development to addressing the question which is asked, which is produced, or the brief which is generated. But actually the question then is, what happens after deployment? So most times the brief will only take you as far as deployment, possibly to first audit, but rarely beyond that. And actually, if we're talking about technologies which are constantly evolving, which are going to be used in different ways, you've got to have that continuous feedback loop baked in to how how the software updates take place, but also how that thing was designed in the first place. And I feel really strongly that if you can get a little bit more of that, when we were talking earlier about, tech teams communicate in a different way from HR teams, from legal teams. If you can get a little bit more of that conversation around, okay, this is the brief we've got, this is what we see from a technology point of view, but actually what might somebody else see as a potential risk or a harm, and what do we do to build that into the architecture to begin with? Right at the very, very start of that design stage. And I think if you can have a bit more of those audit style conversations earlier on, actually stand a chance of creating products which are safer, which are future proofed, which are therefore more commercially valuable, actually, and that are less likely to produce a bottom line liability for the board, who then goes, who signed off on this? Well, it wasn't me. I just did the brief. And what I did to the brief was completely correct and accurate and successful. So that's where this whole kind of network comes back in. So I think, the question I would say is, who is the end user and what potential harms might be caused to them?
Yeah. So the
Excellent.
bottom line is, what are we solving and what are problems are we creating?
Yeah.
Excellent. Louise, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. If people want to find out more about you, where's the best place for that?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very yappy on there. If you want to listen to any of my little small pieces to camera or sign up to the newsletter, then please do so. I'm also on www.chirosynthesis.com or on Substack as well under From Intentions to Impact. That's my newsletter.
Perfect. And we will share all those links in the show notes. So thank you very much, Louise. Thanks everyone for listening or watching, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thank you.